Indiana Disability History Project, Indiana Institute on Disability and Community, Indiana University, ADA Training. Christine Dahlberg.
After the regulations passed, there was a big infusion of federal dollars to train people, mainly people with disabilities and other advocates, on their rights, their new rights under the ADA. And that too was pretty unprecedented, and I don't think that's ever happened in any other civil rights legislation. And I'm not sure what good star was shining on the ADA, but they really put a lot of money into it. And a Disability Rights Education Foundation got a big grant to do training all around the nation on the ADA, and it was focused on people with disabilities and advocates that could then take that information and use it to train and educate others. So we were heavily involved in that training happening here in Indiana, and helped support that by providing some assistance to make sure consumers, people with disabilities, and could get there and could have the opportunity to participate in some of those training. I think there were maybe 2 or 3 week or 2-week-long sessions where people would come in from out of state and do really intensive training on the ADA and how to look at it and what it meant in regard to each of the acts of the ADA, analyzing a situation to see if it's even covered under the ADA and how it's covered. They had a really excellent curriculum. It was mostly people with disabilities and the heads of or staff of advocacy organizations, the independent living centers, for example. A lot of them came and brought folks. The ARC community came. Parents came to some extent, but the main focus was on making sure that people with disabilities themselves knew about their rights under the ADA. So the focus tended to be either on themselves or on organizations that were then going to take that information and use it to train people with disabilities. And after that happened, we had a contract with our local independent living center, and again, Nancy Griffin was the head of it at that time, to do statewide training on the ADA.
Nancy Griffin.
So I wrote a grant application to the Governor's Council, and 7 months later, the ADA Training Network was established in Indiana. We had offices in North, Central, and Southern Indiana. We had expert staff who were trained in the DREDF National Training Program, which I also got the opportunity to participate in. And we went forth and trained anyone who would listen on what the ADA said and what the requirements were and how to meet those. We actually were invited to do training nationally because the folks that we had were so good. And in fact, we trained the entire civil rights staff of the U.S. Department of Transportation and Housing at a seminar that we put together for a week-long training in Washington, D.C. So we were heavily involved in implementation, but basically being sure that folks with disabilities knew what their new rights were, but also that businesses and town halls and whoever, schools, understood what their obligations were under the law.
Music, Redwood Trail. Recorded at the 2009 Indiana Governor's Council for People with Disabilities Conference. Produced by Indiana Institute on Disability and Community, Center for Health Equity. Funded in part by the Indiana Governor's Council for People with Disabilities. Copyright 2018, the Trustees of Indiana University.